All right, we are back with part 2 of beginning video with the DSLR. All right, we are back. It seems like less than a week, but
Yes.
I'm not sure.
I know. It went by just like that.
Yeah.
I guess I should change shirts.
Yeah, I'm telling you, yeah.
So we are here with our crew, and this is part 2 if you didn't see part 1, and we are sponsored by PAC, the Photographers Adventure Club, which does photo walks, workshops, meetings, seminars, all kinds of cool stuff, contests. Check it out at photoadvclub.com. I'd like to introduce everyone. We have Sprague, Susie, Robert Turchik, and my name is Nick. So how's everyone doing today?
Doing great.
All right, so we are back to talk about this big topic. You know, we're trying to condense it down to 30 minutes here. You know, we did 15 already, and now we're trying to do another 15 and see if we can crack some of these ideas and problems people are having with DSLRs when they get them. They're like, oh, I got video. So, if you haven't seen part 1, go back and watch part 1, then come back here. So we're going to go over settings today, I think, a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. We kind of jumped around in the first episode a little bit, but there's.
I blame the fly.
Yeah, that's right.
Definitely.
It was mostly the fly. It's his fault and some of the beer, but mostly the fly.
He'll be back.
Oh yeah.
He's around here somewhere.
Okay. Yeah.
Presentation totally influenced by beer and insects.
Ew. Hopefully not insects in the beer. In any
I had
case.
to check.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Fair enough.
I'm vegetarian, so.
Oh boy.
Anyway.
Okay, then you can eat the fly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we kind of jumped around in the first episode a lot because there is a ton of information out there about how to use a DSLR for video. I think one of the first things that we should discuss is like the settings, the basics. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you really have to go through in the menu to set it up properly to get your results. It's not terribly complicated, but there's a few things that you should know about. And I'm going to speak through Canon experience. I cannot speak through any of the other manufacturers, but they all have similar things that you need to set up. First thing is really your frame rate and data rate for the video.
You're taking notes, right, Susie? So like next time I ask you these questions.
That's right. Yeah. Be less screaming.
That's an inside joke, everyone.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm the keeper of the notes for the settings of how we videotape this.
Which we conveniently lose every week.
Nice.
Week after week. So frame rate, take mental note.
I know the frame rate.
Yeah, at least we're consistent.
Well, and frame rates, there's really kind of two choices. You got 24 or 30, and I'm not going to go into the details too much about that. 24 is basically a film, like movie style frame rate, where 30 is based on television. They have very different looks, and as far as the DSLRs are concerned and our wonderful memory cards, 24 does take up less space than 30. You got 6 frames less information there. Most of the DSLRs actually perform better low light situations at 24 frames. So that's another thought to consider. Going beyond that, the data rate, how much the movie is compressed to get onto that card is a huge concern. There's basically 2 quality settings within the Canons. There's high quality, low quality, IDP, and what's the other one? I cannot remember the name of it.
I don't know because we shoot at IDP.
Yeah, IDP is the high quality.
We're at 1920 IDP, 24 frames.
So, and I think most of the cameras these days will do higher frame rates if you drop the frame size. Like a 720p versus 1080p, you can actually do.
The other one is S. Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah, I can't remember.
I think for most of our videos that are going out, we get them both at 720 and 1080, but we're putting the 720 out because it's, I guess, quicker to stream and stuff online.
Yeah.
We're
online,
downsizing it though.
Yeah.
We're downsampling it for video.
He's back.
The
We're
fly
being
is back.
terrorized by this fly.
Yeah.
His name is Bob, by the
After a
way.
whole
We're filming
week.
in high def, and then we're downsizing it for the web.
Yep. And technically, 720 is still a high def format. You know, it's one of those weird things. Even 4K, there's varieties of 4K.
Super high.
Yep. And really, the 720 is probably about 90% of what I use for like posting online, because it does take up less space. It's a lot less information for people to download, and streaming, it's a lot faster as well.
A lot faster, yeah. And again, people aren't looking at it huge a lot of times.
But if you shoot at 1080, which these cameras can do all day long, scaling it down is going to, you know, be best.
Helps with the portability of the files and things like that.
So other settings, you have your shutter speed and your aperture. So those are two that we're familiar with as photographers of where to be, but it's quite different for video.
In a way it is. You're still dealing, and this is, if you're used to manual photography, that's kind of what we're dealing with. You've got the three-way balanced plate. You've got three things that you can adjust to control light. You've got your shutter, your aperture, and your ISO. That's it. So your shutter speed, whether it's unfortunate or fortunate, is locked into your frame rate. You cannot change that without affecting the look in a negative way. Although some people have done that on purpose, and I can tell you a story about that in a second. But for the most part, if you're shooting 24 frames a second, which is pretty common with the DSLRs, your frame rate, your shutter speed needs to be a multiple of that. So
the inverse of a multiple.
The inverse of a multiple.
Right.
So the closest you can do on these cameras is 1/50th. So technically it should be 1/48th at 24 frames a second, but closest is 1/50th. So you're fine there. If you're shooting 30 frames a second, you want 1/60th. Multiples thereafter, you can do 1/120th, you can do 1/240th, but you start to get jittery look to the film, to the video. One film that was actually shot that way on purpose, not using DSLRs, Saving Private Ryan, the opening scenes were shot at a very strange shutter speed, and I don't remember what it was, but they did it on purpose to kind of build that tension. So that's a filmmaking technique.
Yeah.
But for the most part, you're kind of dialed in at a fairly low shutter speed, and,
Yes.
and you're locked to that. So in low lights, you're looking more at wider apertures or higher ISOs and things to
Yes.
compensate.
Yeah.
Until you start throwing some, studio lights at it.
Oh yeah. So really your other two settings, your ISO and your aperture, are the only ways that you can change light in the camera. The reason that we shoot with the DSLRs, professionally, is we want the shallow depth of field. Funny story about that. I do not want a shallow depth of field that my nose is in focus, but my ear is not in focus. A lot of people get a camera and they'll I got a 51.4. I'm going to shoot everything at 1.4.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can't do that.
Yeah, particularly if you miss the nose or the eye, and then everything's the face is out of focus, but the background is.
And people move naturally. I had a guy try to follow somebody with a Steadicam, and he was at 2.0. And just the motion of walking, they're going in and out of focus, and I'm watching the footage editing, going, "Oh boy."
Well, it's got to make you feel like really uncomfortable as a viewer, because it's not natural to see that happening. It's more natural to see things that are a little bit deeper focus, anything that's 4.0 or higher.
What's interesting about it is the human eye does not see shallow depth of field naturally. Well,
you do
You
to
do,
some.
but you don't.
Your peripheral vision is surprisingly blurry.
Yes.
And then our depth of field, when I'm looking at you, he is actually out of focus.
But it's minuscule.
It's
comparatively.
perceptually though, I think he's in focus, because the instant that I shift my gaze, my focus changes.
You have follow
So
focus.
to me, I do have follow focus. To me, it seems like he's still in focus.
She's a 70D. We have 5D.
Yeah, I know.
You know, I looked at her; it's blurry.
She got a strange set of options when she came out to shoot. You know.
Nice. But traditionally, people, that's why they want the DSLRs, is to push those boundaries.
Susie's on sale at B&H, by the way. Yes.
You know, I want to be able to focus on you, but have you completely blurry, even though you're sitting 2 feet apart. And that's perfectly capable with, you know, any of the DSLRs and like a 2.8 or, you know, faster lens. The natural eye doesn't really do that. You know, it's not.
Well,
that
our brain
extreme.
doesn't think that it does.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we see everything in perfect focus pretty much from near to infinity until you get old, and then you start losing accommodation, and then you start losing it in the near range. But as far as setting an aperture, if you're doing a setting like this, or you're doing family photos and stuff like that, so what's really kind of the sweet spot for that? Because obviously, if it's 1.4, you're not going to do it. But can you do like 4 or 5.6 or?
Well, and part of it depends on the distance to the subject. So there is some, back to photography theories, you know, the focal length of the lens and your aperture determine what the depth of field is. So you kind of got to, you know that a little bit in the back of your head. You don't have to memorize all the numbers, because you're going to be able to see it when you're watching, you know, the back of your camera, and even more so when you go to edit your footage. But in general, you know, 2.8 you can get away with if it's a stationary interview. If they're moving at all, minimum 4.0 and a lot more.
Safe.
Well, because and if you position a subject correctly, like we are here, we have plenty of room to the back wall. Plenty of room to the back wall. So even like a 5.6 or, you know, 6.4 or whatever, you're going to get blurred background.
Yeah.
Even though, you know, I'm still in focus because I'm within that field. But and that's really the well, that's right. Who focused the camera?
I set it up right.
But that's really the attractive part of using the DSLRs. That's what drew all the professionals to it, was to be able to do that with a very inexpensive camera.
So let's move on to a couple of other points real quick, because I think we wanted to talk about, you talked about the inability to change our frame rate while we're shooting, things like that, and our
shutter speed
and our aperture, right? But the light may change, and a lot of times we're shooting in aperture priority mode, so our aperture is going to vary once in a while when we're shooting stills.
Don't want to do that.
You can't do that with video. So talk a little bit about the options at hand.
Okay. And before we go there, I want to mention one other thing that people have fallen into occasionally. As a lot of us know, the L series or more expensive lenses are constant aperture. That becomes incredibly important with video. The aperture cannot change when you're shooting video. Especially on a zoom lens, where some of them are, you know, f4.0 to f5.6 over the zoom range. The cameras cannot deal with that. They freak out. They try to compensate for the light, and you end up with a flickering mess during that. So back to why, you know, a constant aperture lens is important. We need the ability, if it's a zoom lens, to zoom without changing the light that's entering the camera.
So I'm going to clarify just for a moment, in case, so that we don't skip over that. So what I think you're pointing out is the difference between, for instance, the lens that is a telephoto lens that starts at a 3.5 to 5.0 on the long range, and when I would zoom from my widest to my longest point on that lens, my aperture is going to change as I do that, and that's going to cause a problem with the camera. Now, some lenses that are telephoto, like the 70 to 200, is a constant 2.8 start to finish, and that wouldn't introduce that same aberration. But the other variable aperture telephoto lens would.
Unless, of course, if the long end is 5.6 and you're starting at 5.6, then it's going to be essentially the same throughout, I would guess, right?
No, any variable aperture lens is going to change depending on which end you're at. And it does that on purpose. There's just less elements in it. It's a cheaper lens. Not saying anything about the image quality, but there's less elements to make it that constant aperture. No matter what your setting is, like if I use
even if you used f11 or something.
Yeah,
like
if I used f11 on a constant aperture lens, it's going to stay f11 from the long end to the short end.
But it's still going to change as you zoom.
But if you started on a variable lens, on a variable, he's saying, we have it backwards.
Yeah, that was the point I was trying to clarify.
On the variable lens,
if you were to set it to the high end of the zoom range initially, and that was the aperture you're using, then you would have the full range from.
It opens up as you pull back to wide.
As you go back, if you shoot
still change.
If you were at 5 point, well, let's just say you were at f8.
Okay.
And you're shooting at, let's say you've got a 7200 at f8, and so you're shooting at 200 at f8, and then you bring it back to 70, then it's going to pull back from f8.
If it's a variable aperture lens, most of the 70 to 200s are constant. But for instance, when I first actually got into this, I had what was it, an 18 to 55, I think.
Yeah, there is, and there's a 24 to 135 that's real popular. That is a variable, and I think it's a 28 to 135.
Yeah, the kit lens.
Thanks. Yeah.
And they look beautiful as long as you don't zoom them.
Yeah.
The minute you zoom,
then the light just goes in and out,
crazy.
And you just get sort of a fluttering type of effect. Or...
Yeah, and unlike still photography, where it doesn't really matter because you can always roll your shutter or change your settings as you go from wide open to a closed aperture. You can't do that in video because it's recording all that information, and the camera, because it's expecting a constant aperture in video mode, it freaks out. It's not even a nice gradual thing. It tries to compensate and loses it.
Interesting, because a lot of people that probably are testing and playing with this don't know that, and they have those entry level lenses. I know I had all lenses that were EFS with my Canon, and I had to sell them all when I got a full frame. So I'm like, they don't fit my full frame. So I have all L lenses now, but it was definitely something that they were a variable. I teach people that in my 101 class because they don't know. They just get a lens and they're like, why can't I get 3.5? It says 3.5, and it's like, well, 3.5 dash 5.6. So when you go far, you're not going to get that back.
But like you said, if you just got your camera and you got the kit lens and it's variable, etc., it's not obvious, and you would kind of chase your tail trying to figure out what's causing that oddity.
And then you buy a GoPro and it's all good.
Well, and there's
so more to
So that's one aspect to really consider with your lens choice. If you expect to be able to zoom, you need a constant aperture lens. Now, the other thing that happens with that, like the EFS lenses, the zoom rings are not the most friendly things. They're kind of notchy and loose. And that's another reason for a high quality lens is, the rings are very, very smooth. I can do a zoom very easily with all of my lenses. Zooms, once again, that's if you need it. If you don't need it, it doesn't matter. Like I said, lens to lens is the difference in image quality is very minimal when you're talking about video. Now, we've kind of gone over shutter speed has to remain the same. Your ISO has to remain constant. Your aperture has to remain constant. Well, how the heck do you control light? Well, and this is where you get into filters. The most common with video is the variable density filters, and you were mentioning you have one, but it does the X thing.
Yeah, if I'm pushing it too far.
Because a variable density filter, if you're not familiar with them, is essentially two polarized filters that are stacked, and as you close them, well, it's lines that are making an X. So the lesser quality variable density filters have an issue with that.
This is my holdover until I can get my Liebig stopper. So.
And
just kidding.
I when I first realized what the variable NDs were for, and went to B&H and went, oh,
yeah,
that's like why they're expensive.
Very spendy.
Yeah, very spendy. And unfortunately, I upgraded lenses to the Mark IIs on my 24-70 and 70-200.
And they changed the size.
And they changed the filter size, so
size.
I had to buy the bigger one, which is
That's
even
why I
more
have no
money.
filters anymore, because I'm like half my lenses are this size, half
Can
are
you
that
buy
size.
a large ND filter as far as the ring size,
Yeah.
and then use a step down for your smaller ones?
And that's what I ended up doing. I said, well, you know what? I'm only going to buy one of these things, so let's go for the 82, which fits all of my wide angles, and I can step it down very easily for the 72 millimeter versions. Now, the reason for the variable is actually pretty simple. On a video camera, you have an iris, which photographers are like, iris, what the heck is that? Iris is essentially just a way to stop down your lens on a video camera. It's just not found on still cameras, so you don't have that option. The variable ND filters perform the same function because you can actually smoothly kind of shut down the light that gets into the lens, which is handy because if you were stuck with a set of lenses like a 0.3, 0.6, 0.9, or 1.2 NDs, there's a lot of times where you might be needing that in between to properly expose the scene. The variables, I actually work it like the iris on a video camera. My hand is there. If I need to zoom, I just go back to that ring, but then it's right back to the variable ND, and I can ride a scene if I'm outside in bright sunlight and there might be a cloud passing over. Well, I got to open up the ND, then close it back down. You cannot do that smoothly in the camera. It has to be a filter.
Gotcha.
We have a part 3 to this one, and it's going to be next week. You're going to be able to see that and learn more about audio and how to actually produce your videos and put them out on the web for everyone to be able to see them. So once again, this is coming to you from PAC, the photoadvclub.com. Go check that out and leave your comments down below, and we'll see you real soon. We're getting low on beer, I think.